Hello and welcome to the Tifo Football podcast. I am Joe Devine and today I'm joined by Seb Stafford-Bloor.
Hello, Joe.
Hello, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you.
Oh, good. Thanks for coming.
No problem.
Today we're talking about UEFA. That's very exciting, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah.
It is indeed.
We're talking about UEFA because there are two big European finals upcoming. And at the start, I would like to let listeners know that for the last sort of 10 minutes of this podcast, we might discuss a bit of the football, but we're going to leave that until the end because some of you might be listening to this after the games have taken place. Most of the rest of the information will still be of interest to you and isn't time sensitive in the same way. So if you want to stick around to the football bit at the end, please do. If not, I will alert you as to when we are discussing things that have happened in the past and you can depart henceforth. But we're talking about UEFA today because, as I said, there are two big European finals coming up. And there are, I suppose, two different kinds of controversy relating to not necessarily the locations, but in a way the locations of both of them. The UEFA Champions League is in Madrid, and there's some controversy over the cost of travel, particularly getting there. So we're going to talk about that. The other one, the Europa League final, is in Baku in Azerbaijan, and there are potentially some more problems there that we're going to discuss as well. So we thought it'd be useful, Seb, if you would be able to enlighten me and us as to the process of choosing a location for a final of a big European tournament, because it's obviously the location, the choice is made some years in advance of the final itself. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I think people should think of it as most people will be familiar with the World Cup bidding process. It's very, very similar. So, albeit on a shorter timescale. So, back in 2017, cities were invited to tender for the opportunity to host the various European finals. So UEFA tend to gather these en masse. So they don't say, right, well, host the Europa League final, host the Champions League final, host the Super Cup final. That's the third one in the mix. Cities are invited to put together a dossier. Actually, what we might do is we might put one of the reports as a link on the YouTube channel so people can see what we're talking about.
We'll link that in the description of the podcast.
Yeah, I think so. I think that'd be helpful so that they can get a real idea of the depth of these. And cities make a presentation. I mean, it's not quite as grand as people remember Morgan Freeman reading the American bid out in I think 2010 or something when he missed a page and had to stop. And not quite like that, but it's thorough. So the idea is to present a proposal, in terms of accommodation, training facilities, hospitality, the ability to house sponsors, travel, all the things that you can imagine which go into hosting one of those kind of occasions, one of those events. And then from that point on, UEFA's executive committee, not quite mark, but evaluate the proposal. They have sort of criteria which have to be met in terms of, so we're going to get to this, the amount of fans that are coming in, travel logistics, how people can be accommodated. They have this thing about how they need a certain amount of people, a certain amount of hotel spaces and living areas within 60 kilometers of the grounds. Basically, yeah, beds. And as we're going to get onto, that is, there are some fairly loose interpretations of what that consists of. I mean, we with Baku, it seems to be stretching to campsites and university dormitories too.
Right. Well, let's take it back a step.
Yeah.
Because one of the reasons that this is in the news at the moment is because Arsenal sent a letter to UEFA about the situation in Baku. They will be going to play Chelsea in the Europa League final. And Arsenal made it clear to UEFA that they were unhappy with the circumstances. Now, Baku is the modern day home of Karabakh, who have appeared in the Europa League in the
Champions League as well,
and Champions League tournament in recent years. Azerbaijan is a wealthy country. Baku appears to be a beautiful city. What's the problem? Why did Arsenal complain to UEFA about this?
Okay, so the genesis of the controversy is that the stadium in Baku has a capacity of 65,000, and UEFA have made 6,500 tickets available to Arsenal and Chelsea, which
each,
which is under a fifth of the capacity. Clearly, at the time that we're recording this, Chelsea are yet to sell out their allocation. Arsenal wrote to UEFA after they reached the final to say that, obviously, to complain about this, but also there are a set of other issues which have arisen. Getting to Baku physically is very, very difficult. I spoke to a few journalists about a month ago who, knowing that they would be covering the event, booked their tickets in advance. And even then, there's 2 stops. I think some people have to go through Odessa in Ukraine. There are long layovers. There are tremendous costs involved. And Arsenal had a very broad concern about all of this, and wanted to see if UEFA would participate in trying to bring some of those costs down to help people with the travel logistics. And UEFA succeeded only really in inflaming the situation by sending a very sort of saccharine letter in the response, in which they said, well, we can't possibly be expected to foresee very large European clubs qualifying. Yeah, absolutely.
The bit you're referring to there, UEFA state, it goes without saying that an all-English final played by 2 London teams was not a very predictable event at the time of the appointment, which I find to be a funny sentence anyway, because I think partly the fact that the teams are from London in England makes no difference really.
Well, let's broaden that. Like, forget the English aspect of it. So you've got a Europa League tournament, and you have a fair idea, give or take a few sides, of who's going to be competing. Mm-hmm. Now, I had a look on the train up here today. I had a look at sort of how one might get to Baku from not just England, but from France, from Germany. Italy is a little bit easier, but Spain. So if you think about those countries and you think about the teams that are typically going to qualify as second-tier continental sides, you got a fair idea of who's going to be competing. And you know from that.
It's not unpredictable.
It's not unpredictable. Yes, you don't know the exact identity. 2 years out, of course, you can't predict that it's going to be an all-English final. But I found that to be kind of incidental. Mm-hmm. I mean, no one saw Arsenal or Chelsea in the Europa League final. But at the same time, Sevilla have competed many times in the Europa League final. Would it have been so outlandish to see a side like Ajax? No, probably not.
Well, in 3 of the last 6 Europa League finals, English teams have been present. Sevilla have been present in 3 of them. Ajax were present in 2017. Dnipro and Benfica and Marseille are the other 3.
Atletico Madrid have been in a couple too. And
so it is very predictable, which I think is the interesting thing about that statement. It goes without saying that an all-English final played by 2 London teams was not a very predictable event at the.
It's quite a predictable outcome.
Yeah,
it
really is.
Forget you don't even need to make it 2 English teams. Just say that if there is one English side qualifying for that final, that is going to be a very difficult set of travel.
And across the last 6 years, it's a 50% chance that you're going to get an English team in the final. So the saying that it's not very predictable is bizarre. There's some other funny things from the statement as well. There's a whole paragraph on how for UEFA fans are priority, which is interesting. And also the bit at the end, I trust your understanding as men of sport and representatives of a club with a long and glorious tradition.
I think in retrospect, that's the bit I take issue with most.
Very strange.
Because it's a very sly attempt to kind of create this binary situation between UEFA's view of how the final should be held and the bad way of doing things.
Stay in your lane is what it is. And your lane is supposed to be honourable. And if you're not doing this right now, just to let you know.
Well, even in non-sporting terms, you're saying basically if you're against us, then you are against the game.
Yeah.
Which I strongly object to. Yeah. I think that's Arsenal's original letter was not necessarily, it was forceful, I guess, in a way. It was urgent, but I don't think any of the issues raised by Arsenal were unreasonable. Well, and it deserved a better response than that.
Yeah, I agree. And they summarise it just before the final paragraph where they talk about being men of sport. They say that's why UEFA would consider it utterly unfair to exclude certain venues just based on their decentralised geographical position, which I'm fairly certain wasn't the entirety of what Arsenal was saying. They failed to acknowledge the other things that are the problems of the...
Quite deliberately, because there are no answers for those other concerns.
And I'm pretty sure no one is saying... the final shouldn't be in Azerbaijan because it's really far away. They're saying because none of us are allowed to attend, there are all these other problems of which I think we can, talk more about now. The beds being one of them.
Well, I've read through most of the assessment reports. Forgive me, I'm not going to read all of it because it's pretty dense and not the most entertaining read. But we'll put it on the YouTube channel and people can read it for themselves. This accommodation thing is. Those concerns have existed for 2 years. Those concerns existed at the point where Baku was awarded this final. And there's a line in it where it talks about there isn't sufficient accommodation within the 60-mile radius. So therefore, we must build a contingency of campsites. And it goes no further. It's just a kind of, we'll put people in campsites. There seems to be, what troubles me is there seems to be no due diligence over, right, well, how many campsites are there? What is your estimation for people per campsite? This is a really, really big European football event in a part of the world which is historically sensitive and a little bit volatile. The lack of care is a bit strange. The detail that you expect to find in something like that just isn't there. It's very vague.
Well, we also say, the lack of due diligence. One could argue that the due diligence has been done and then is ignored.
Yeah.
And then that as you said, many of these issues appeared throughout that process, but then somehow the vote was taken over the line anyway.
Well, absolutely. And you spoke about a bit in the UEFA's response to Arsenal, where they talked about, it couldn't have been foreseen that two of these clubs would be in the final. It's irrelevant. Yeah. These issues would have arisen whoever was in the final.
Right.
Unless Karabag had made it themselves.
Yeah.
Where, okay, that's a little bit different. Or a team from the Ukraine. These are, go and price that up at a bookmaker's. I mean, it's not, so these problems are always going to exist. And they were going to exist whether this was being contested by English teams, German teams, French teams, Spanish teams, maybe slightly less Italian teams. But the point is that teams that win this competition are very big and are very well supported. And no matter the outcome of the tournament itself, there was always going to be a lot of people that weren't able to go to it because so much of the stadium is reserved for sponsors and that terrible phrase, friends of football, whatever that means.
And so what we're saying is about 13,000 of the 65,000 seats are going to fans of the two teams.
Yeah. Well, if that, because I don't think the cost of actually making the trip is so prohibitive that I don't think...
what is the cost? Do you know?
It's thousands.
Yeah.
So I saw an estimate. Someone sent me a tweet today saying that they paid £1,400 all in, which is, that for a lot of people, that's more than a month's salary after tax. That's ridiculous.
Yeah.
So also the thing I object to is that UEFA phrased this as if the final is a one-off event, as if throughout the course of the season, there haven't been thousands of Arsenal and Chelsea fans that have been travelling all over the continent to support their progress to this point. It's as if they're treating it like a charity shield. Do you know what I mean? It's like it's a rootless final, which it absolutely isn't. And so what you're doing is you're saying, well, sorry, but whoever the 50,000 other people who are in that stadium are, they're more important. So, and I don't think it's too old school to take issue with that. I think it's appalling.
Well, I'm going to play devil's advocate for a moment now, because I would imagine that one of the things that UEFA would say about, or one of the positives that UEFA would point out about the process being the way that it is that a huge game of football is going to be brought to Baku, a place that maybe hasn't housed a game of football between Arsenal and Chelsea, or something of that caliber before, right? Mm-hmm. That the idea is about spreading the love of football as far as you possibly can, making sure that other nations and other regions are as involved, and essentially bringing more fans to the game. And maybe the cost of £1,400 for a ticket for someone who lives in London and gets to watch Arsenal play at the level that they play every weekend or every other weekend, that's the price you have to pay for doing that.
It's difficult. Like,
is it fair that a tournament can't be in Baku because of these reasons?
No,
like, should the capital city have to spend millions of pounds facilitating it so that they can be allowed to hold it? Or can we have 1 year where, it goes to Baku and actually the majority of the people, probably not the majority given that the number of sponsorship and corporate related tickets would do it, but at least some of the locals will be able to go and watch this game. And otherwise, if there were higher ticket allocations for Chelsea and Arsenal, wouldn't have been able to have the experience of ever doing that. Arsenal and Chelsea fans will have that at numerous other occasions.
Well, I think it's a multifaceted question. I mean, I think...
it was. I went on for a long time.
No, but that's okay because it is a complex issue. Like, first of all, no, there's nothing... I don't think anyone's saying it shouldn't be in Baku. I think people are saying, do this, and the growth of the game is good, and the centralized power of European football, as opposed to what it was 30, 40 years ago, is a bad thing. However, with the determination to grow the game comes a responsibility. So hold it in Baku, but make sure that remains a achievable destination, a responsible destination.
But what does that mean? That means expand your airports by 50%, 100%.
Potentially, but then this is always gone with hosting events. Azerbaijan is not a poor country. So if you want to hold the Olympics, you build a lot of stadia.
Uh-huh.
If you want to hold the World Cup, ditto. Training grounds, hotels, transport facilities. That is part and parcel of it.
We've seen, though, with countries like South Africa and like Brazil, the cost of doing that, and for governments, if you can secure the bid for a World Cup, for example, it's a huge boon. The cost of doing that, and then the air quotes legacy of that afterwards, has a massive hit on or can have a massive economic hit on the nations who were hosts. So is it a sensible or fair thing to do then to essentially force Baku as a city into building enough infrastructure to be able to host an event like this, and then potentially leaving it with economic problems afterwards, or just letting them have one?
I think there's a way of doing it, and this goes well beyond my expertise, of course. But I think if as part of hosting this kind of competition, whether it be a one-off final or an Olympics, if there is an aspect of it which can benefit the populace once the event has gone and once the foreign money has left the country, then you can make a far easier case for it. If it is just, well, we want a football tournament, then I want to know, and I'm yet to, in all the reading I've done, I'm yet to know beyond getting to watch a high-tier football match, I'm yet to really understand what the benefit is to Baku.
Well, presumably it puts it on the international stage in a way that it may not have previously been.
Of course, but what does that really mean, though?
It'll be the same reason why there are high numbers of corporate tickets at the event itself.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's what it's about.
But that's the thing. I think this is what we're arguing towards. It's kind of why, why
does Russia want to host the World Cup?
Well, I suppose there's a very clear PR purpose behind that. You can make the argument with long-term tournaments that there is an influx of revenue. I'm not sure I wholly agree with that because of the way visiting supporters and traveling fans are herded through, not necessarily Russia, but FIFA World at those kind of competitions. Mm-hmm. So I think it's if that argument's going to be made, I think it has to be made in more detail and in a more compelling way than it has been in this instance, because at the moment the way it's been presented is, well, it's Baku's turn to host it, and that's absolutely fine. It should be shared around. But if Baku has not made the steps necessary to accommodate an event of that scale, should it be an independent city? It's a difficult one, and it's one of those things when you make this argument, it always sounds a little bit like you're saying, no, every final should be at Wembley because that's convenient for me personally. I don't agree with that at all. I think I think one of the big problems with hosting events like this, but also we talked about this before we came on air, also the sort of the culture of big European teams going on tour in different places. I think there's a real danger sometimes of trampling on domestic infrastructure. So little Jimmy, who is 6 years old and really, really likes football, and lives in Australia, if he's taken to see Liverpool when they're playing, an A-League All-Stars team, is he going to gravitate towards the Premier League, or is he going to gravitate towards what is at that point an inferior domestic competition? I think not enough care is really taken with that person, because I think the way to grow football globally and in a sustainable way is to promote domestic leagues, not to kind of import teams and allow them to harvest another set take overseas fans.
And herein lies the conflict, right?
Of course.
This is what you're saying. And if we put this into, take a slightly different perspective on this, when UEFA say grow football or grow the sport, what they mean is grow the brand identity of the big clubs, which currently they control on the European stage. Yeah. And if Manchester United and Liverpool, Chelsea, Arsenal, Man City are bigger teams, and Tottenham, sorry, shouldn't have missed
European Cup finalists.
European Cup finalists are bigger teams, and then whenever they play internationally with other European countries, other European clubs, UEFA controls that. That in turn makes UEFA more powerful. That's what UEFA mean, right? When they say that,
at a guess, yes, because the whole thing seems like an act of appeasement, really. We this is off topic, of course, but we understand the tensions that exist between UEFA and the big clubs under their control. or under their control is in air commas, obviously at the moment. We also understand what some of the ambitions are for the future of European club football. So I just don't, I can't believe the game growing excuse, or not excuse, but rationale, this sort of like good of the game mantra, which is trotted out whenever a kind of something like this happens, because we've seen it before. And it's kind of at the root of it, Joe, you know what? I'm sick of the fan being a commodity. I'm sick of the fan being something that can be herded around Europe or the world, charged exorbitant fees for things which shouldn't be out of reach for most people. And they're there to be, the metaphor is every time one of these competitions happen, whether it's a club competition, a world competition, international tournament, European final, the image is of fans being held by their ankles and shaken until all of the cash is out of their pockets. And that is like these finals. So when the Europa League final happens and its sponsors are being given the airtime and the access to new populations, they're riding on the back of fans who have allowed this team to be in this position. And there is something fundamentally wrong about that. It's such an abusive relationship. And I was talking to some people on Twitter this morning, recording this on Tuesday, which is about 8 days before the final. And, they were sort of, they were expecting, this feels like a tipping point. It's gone much too far, like to be, we're going to get to this with the Champions League final as well. It's just like, stop abusing the fans. Stop trying to monetize their loyalty. I mean, some of that is inevitable, but the levels to which it's being monetized, it's grotesque.
Is that not what football is, though?
Increasingly so, but then this is an argument that I would spread across all of those areas of football. Stop abusing the fan. And especially do so if you're an organisation like UEFA. You are supposed to sit atop of these fans, and you set an example. Like, if you're not willing to do it, how are the member clubs? How can you expect the member clubs to sort of to do anything other than price in a pejorative is the wrong way, but exploitative way?
Mm. Well, I suppose that the thing that UEFA and the big clubs have in common is that the fan is a commodity. Beyond that, there's a lot of conflict, and this is again slightly off topic, but I still find it difficult to understand how, after all of the controversy that blew up around FIFA a few years back, and all of the Football League stuff that took UEFA down essentially and exposed those
FIFA,
UEFA as well, right? And
Platini, yeah.
But also Infantino and those alleged email correspondence between Infantino and Manchester City, or people at Manchester City,
the Spiegel revelations,
and the constant looming threat of a European Super League, I think is the crux of the conflict. What UEFA want least is for there to be a breakaway, like there was in England in the early 90s. And I don't know. I think the one thing that they do have in common, as you say, is that the fan is a commodity. The more I look at football objectively today, the less, and the further I am away from the terraces, to be poetic about it, the less I understand why people watch it. Because it seems like a big, at the very top, there's a big club of people who are making an awful lot of money and laughing their asses off at the ignorance of people going. And I know fans aren't ignorant. And I had a conversation with James Montague, a journalist, not long ago on this podcast, where I asked him, genuinely, what are you supposed to do if you're a Manchester City fan? What are you supposed to do? You're effectively put in not impossible, but very unfair and difficult position.
I agree.
And obviously, the answer is not to engage in whataboutery and the rest of it, and not to, I don't know,
feign expertise in areas which you don't really understand and shouldn't be really trying to.
But I have a sympathy for those people.
Absolutely.
Because what are they supposed to do?
Yeah, but that's the truth that goes right to heart of the matter. In that, like, football is not a pastime. It, for many people, is a habit of a lifetime.
Mm.
It is something that you're supposed just to give it up because someone has bought your club, someone that you were there before and probably be there afterwards, and you find their activity away from the game morally questionable. That's a very difficult thing to ask of anybody. So yeah, I absolutely have sympathy. But then this is football. You're in one sense, you're expected to not ask questions beyond the pitch. And, we've seen the tone of Manchester City's response to the allegations which have been made against them in the last few days. On the other hand, though, you're still supposed to, without asking questions and without wondering why, hand over, in some people's cases, 1 or 2 months worth of wages for a single ticket.
Mm-hmm.
Single ticket. 90 minutes of football. Interestingly, I've been in the press box for quite a few, 3-4 years now. And when it comes to actually having to buy my own ticket, I can't do it.
Mm.
Just because you see what you're paying for. Like before, it was special. Now, because it's my job and I get paid to do it, and I'm very, very fortunate. But now the idea of someone saying, right, well, that's 60 quid, be like, fuck off. Chance. I'm not paying that. And most people don't have that choice. Either they pay that money or they don't go. And it's grossly unfair. And these European finals, I'm a Tottenham fan. I'm not going to Madrid, but so be it. For some people, quite a lot of Tottenham fans can realistically expect this to be the only time in their lifetime they will get to see this. Tottenham in a Champions League final must be joking. It's ridiculous. So as a result, that person is then incredibly vulnerable to any airline carrier, to any hotel owner, to any bed and breakfast owner. There are stories
which we're going to come on and talk about.
Okay, let me back off that then. Okay.
We're going to come back to that.
Okay.
What I want to do first, I don't want to leave Baku the way we've left it. I feel bad about it. I want to talk about the Flame Towers. I'm on the Irish Examiner right now, theirishexaminer.com. I want to tell you about 5 things. I want the Irish Examiner to tell you about 5 things you should do if you are going to Baku, or indeed if you want to go to Baku.
If I've remortgaged my house.
If you remortgage your house and go to Baku, or if you remortgage your house and go to Baku, not even to see the football, just to go, because it does look like a lovely city. The Flame Towers. It says here that Azerbaijanis revere fire. There's more to that sentence, but I won't read it. National Carpet Museum is actually shaped like a rolled up Persian rug.
That's pretty cool.
That is actually very cool. It's the sort of thing I would go to. The world's biggest KFC.
That I wouldn't go to.
Old Town Markets, which there's nothing funny about them. They look lovely. And the giant flag, which is 70 by 35 meters. And you can find more information about those places on the Irish Examiner.
Maybe that's a link we might put in the
I think I've
too.
used the Irish Examiner quite a lot there, but I've said it 6 or 7 times, the Irish Examiner.
It does sound like we're now sponsored by them in some way.
It does, but we aren't. We just value the good work and journalism that the Irish Examiner publishes, I would imagine, on a daily basis. And if you are going to Baku, do check out the Irish Examiner. Let's talk about the other Let's talk about the other European League final. The biggie, the big one, Dr. Big. It's
Feel like that bit could have gone better. Dr. Big. I feel like Alex is like a restraining force on you sometimes.
Yeah, he is. He's not here to shepherd me in.
So it's gone off the rails.
Sorry, everyone. Sorry about that. But it's the big one. It is, I feel silly saying it,
Dr.
Tottenham,
Big.
as you said.
Yeah.
Not Dr. Big. That makes more sense than Tottenham in a Champions League final. And Liverpool, which makes more sense, 2nd year in a row, of course. We are going to talk about the football later, as I said earlier. But tell me now, because the other controversy here is the cost of the tickets. This isn't a new thing either. This happens every year, and it happens with other big world events too. The airlines, I would imagine, are trying to scrape back some of the millions in losses they're making at selling me a ticket to Vigo for £15, which doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense.
Pre-airport tax?
I don't know what that means.
Well, so there's a cost of a ticket, and then when you go to the checkout to buy your ticket, sometimes there's an airport tax added onto it. Which
I don't think there was, no.
Okay.
I mean, it was Ryanair,
so
and
you literally
I then paid £46 to take a bag.
So that's a stealth tax.
There you go.
So it's not really okay.
Sure.
Right.
Well, hey, but it was, the ticket was £15.
It feels nice saying it was £15.
It was £15.
Yeah, you got a bargain.
Sure.
We'll just say that.
But I was reading upon your instruction earlier, and I was reading about this on BBC Newsround, which is, apparently, still going. Champions League final, how much will it cost to get there? Liverpool and Tottenham fans may be rivals when it comes to the chat. This is just copy. 840% is the
rise
the
in
increase of flights to the Spanish city and surrounding towns. So if you're trying to be cheeky and fly into somewhere nearby, they're going to get you there too. 840% is an awful lot of money. Hotel rooms are more than £1,000 a night, with stories of room bookings being cancelled and resold at vastly inflated rates, which I imagine is illegal.
Right, so I've got an interesting story for you. Like I was speaking to a journalist a couple of years ago. We were, I forget where, but we were talking about the 2018 World Cup, and it was probably 2017 or something. And we were talking about cost, and he told me what he does for international tournaments is he books a year in advance. He has educated guesses on booking.com about where he's going to need accommodation. And then what seems to happen is once the hotel have kind of caught on to what he's trying to do, his booking gets cancelled. The room gets sort of put back up for hire at like 4 times the cost.
So everyone wins.
Except the person that needs the room, of course.
Okay, so the other thing we wanted to talk about in reference to the Champions League final is the Tottenham Hotspur Supporters Trust and Spirit of Shankly, the fan group for Liverpool as well, who have made some statements about the cost of travel. Will you fill us in about that?
So Tottenham first. So when the cost of travel came out, Martin and Kat, who lead THST, wrote to the club and talked to them about potentially subsidising travel for the fans. The club came back to them and said no, because the justification was that if they do that, then they are essentially subsidising UEFA. So there's no incentive for UEFA then to rethink their pricing in later years. Which
does that argument make sense to you?
It makes superficial sense, because if you set the precedent of saying that charge what you like and the clubs will pick up the bill, then there is no actual pressure on UEFA, the organisation.
But presumably the pressure would either come from the fans or from Tottenham as a club, as an organisation who have the fans behind them.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I mean, I understand the reasoning.
If Tottenham told their fans not to do something, not to participate in a UEFA competition or ticketing process or something, more fans would do that than would galvanise themselves to boycott alone.
I suspect you're right.
Particularly if the club they support is still participating.
Well, that's my read on it too. I mean, do I understand the reasoning? Yes. Do I agree with it? No, not really. I think it's just something they don't want to do. But I have to say, I'm really proud of the supporters organisation, both organisations. So, Spirit of Shankly, when Liverpool and Tottenham qualified for the final, we were each told that they were each getting an allocation of just over 16,500 tickets, 16,600 or something, basically each. And the final's being held in the Wanda Metropolitano, which holds, I think, about 68,000, something around that. Brand new stadium, Atletico Madrid's ground, of course. Now, Spirit of Shankly took the step of writing to the sponsors of the Champions League, who obviously, so that, Tottenham and Liverpool fans will comprise just under half of the stadium. Obviously, that's an awful lot of tickets being taken up by sponsors. So they wrote to each sponsor, which includes MasterCard, PlayStation, Gazprom, probably a couple of other minor sponsors in there too, and said, can you release more tickets? Which is a really admirable step. I think, they don't have to do that. Thinking of, other fans and the community at large. The only sponsor to actually get back to them at the time that we're recording this, it's Tuesday, just over 10 days before the final. The only sponsor to come back to them was MasterCard, who gave a pretty inadequate response about, but we've got competition winners and people that have got tickets as a result of MasterCard promotions and stuff. So no, and nobody else. Basically, Gazprom and PlayStation just ignore them completely.
Sure, and the associate director's nephew and his friends, and
exactly.
All the rest of them, right?
Precisely. So, it's been very heartening. It's a very unpleasant situation, but huge credit to Arsenal, to the AST, because they've issued their own statements. But these Liverpool and Tottenham groups have really shown their purpose. I don't know anyone at Spirit of Shankly, but I do know Martin and Kat at Spurs, and credit to them. They they went
trying to keep organisations in line, which is the purpose of
that's
the group.
That's the job
like
of it.
Right?
You are supposed to fight for the fans, and they've shown that they're doing that. So
From a cynical point of view as well, I would imagine that it's, again, make the point that we're recording this over a week before the final. As you mentioned, the only sponsor to respond at the moment has been MasterCard. It seems like a missed opportunity for an enormous organisation who won't miss the money to say, yeah, sure, here's some tickets, at the benefit of the fans, to you from us, and have a massive positive news story.
You know what they should have done? You know what the smartest play would have been? It's like, internally they thought, yeah, you know what, that's a really good idea. Let's put 300 tickets. What we'll do is we'll hire a digital agency. We'll record the act of going to surprise people that can't get tickets. We'll actually fly them to the game, and then we will roll it out as a series of adverts broadcast on TV. You can't buy that.
And then we'll give them a MasterCard card with a massive APR on it.
Yeah, that's the harder sell.
Sorry, that's the bit they don't do.
There's a sensible idea there. PlayStation 2, man. Like, you got, I don't know, a couple of guys who, you need.
There's a PlayStation 4 now, Seb.
Sorry, PlayStation 4. Yeah,
I think you were saying PlayStation 2 as well.
For PlayStation 2, that's what I mean. Yeah. Okay, so
for PlayStation as well.
For PlayStation as well, right? So you've got guys that and women and children and old people that sort of people that typically cannot afford the cost or cannot get tickets. You say, yeah, this is exactly what we'll do. We will, we will. Well, the old sort of Noel Edmonds house party thing where we used to burst into people's homes and surprise them. Do that.
Yeah.
Don't do that. Sometimes I cannot believe how short-sighted these organizations are. Like, you want to go into their sort of their marketing department and say, right, what are you doing? What are you doing? How do we come out on the right side of this? And that's the answer. It's not even imaginative. It's been done so many times before, but that's how you handle it. And you make, not only do you put yourself ahead of every other sponsor, but you give a small benevolent gesture which costs you nothing, and you still come out on the other side of it, probably making quite a lot of money.
Seems like a misstep, doesn't it? Or a missed opportunity.
Incredible. And also, I think the thing I find dispiriting is not like MasterCard gave a fairly incidental response to Spirit of Shankly, but just not to respond to them. Do you have any idea how many Liverpool fans are in contact with that organisation, how influential they are, and what the things that they stand for? Like, you're crazy. You don't even, forget what we've just talked about. Just give a cursory reply. Just. Do
you want to name them again?
Human.
Other than MasterCard, who were the other sponsors?
PlayStation
as
and
of
Gazprom.
Recording, PlayStation and Gazprom, who have not responded at all at the current time of recording.
No, if they turn out and they record and they do respond between now and then, okay.
Yeah. If not, shame on you.
Deserve it.
Incidentally, we have a huge video about Gazprom, which I would encourage everyone to go and watch, because there's plenty of other things to be distressed about regarding that company.
Sure there are.
Okay.
It depresses me a little bit. I think that it's just it would be such a human thing to do. Maybe you don't even go at your tickets, but maybe you make some gesture. Maybe you fund something in the centre of Liverpool. Maybe I don't know. Maybe Tottenham are going to show the game, the broadcast game inside their new ground. Maybe you do something there. Maybe I don't know what, but you just, it's so logical.
Yeah. It's very strange. It's a win-win, it would seem to be, but apparently not. Okay, well, let's move on from that, because it's all rather depressing, isn't it? And let's move to another depressing topic, which is the discussion of what's happening currently with Henrik Mkhitaryan, who you have informed me is not travelling with Arsenal.
No, so
just give us a flavour as to why. Tell us a little bit about the story here, because it's not that complicated.
Not really. So obviously, Henrik Mkhitaryan is an Armenian. Baku is in Azerbaijan, and there is a long fractious history between Armenia and Azerbaijan. On top of the conflicts and sort of the Russian involvement in some of those conflicts.
Both part of the ex-Soviet Union.
Exactly. But there hasn't actually been, I read this morning, there hasn't actually been a proper orthodox diplomatic relationship between the two countries since I think I'm right in saying 1921, 1922, something like that.
Right.
So this is a very long-standing issue.
Yeah.
So when Arsenal qualified for the final, the Azerbaijani FA, or the equivalent, issued assurances about Henrik Mkhitaryan's safety. Given the lack of diplomatic communication between the two countries, for whatever reason, that was not sufficient. Most likely it wouldn't have been sufficient for Arsenal's insurers, or maybe even Mkhitaryan's his family. I dare say they've had that conversation with relatives and friends and what have you. And this morning, it's announced on Arsenal's website that he will not travel with the squad for the final.
We've had this issue before. Arsenal have played Karabakh. Was it Man United who played Karabakh? I can't remember. I think it was Arsenal,
and he didn't take part in that.
And incidentally, there's another video which I think the original script appeared on the Tifo website. It was written by Robert O'Connor, and it's about Karabakh.
Very
FC.
fine piece, very fine video. It's very interesting about kind of the nature of Karabakh's rivalry and their sort of their history. And
well, the reason I bring it up is because I suppose in an instance when Arsenal are playing the club Karabakh, for example, it might be slightly more understandable that Mkhitaryan wouldn't want to travel. If you want to go and watch the video, it'll give you a much deeper and probably much better explanation than I'm about to. But Karabakh being in Baku, it's not its original home. Its original home is in an area which is a region which is now has been the region of conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan for, as Seb was saying, for decades. So the original home of the club that you are going to play, I can understand if that is a contentious thing. The idea of not being able to go and play in the country seems to take it a step further for me.
I agree. I think it's I don't know what the remedy is here because I am not an expert in international relations.
Well, presumably UEFA can issue a statement saying that it wasn't predictable that this would happen.
I mean, that's the thing. I mean, I think what I'd like to happen here is that some people on Twitter have been talking about a boycott. It's not going to happen because, you know, wherever the Europa League if final is played, there is a Champions League place at the end of it, and clubs are just not going to walk away from that opportunity, and I understand why. What I'd like now to happen is, and hopefully by the time this releases it has, I think I'd like Chelsea and Arsenal to talk to each other about this, to present some kind of unified front to UEFA, because even if it has no effect on this final, it's going to happen in Baku. But if you think about the people contained within those respective boardrooms and organisations, that is a very powerful group.
Well, that's the beginning of a European Super League right there.
Well, I don't mean in that sense.
I just mean right. that is how it would begin.
That's one of those sort of those spring moments which creates issues elsewhere. But I think in terms of, forget, you know, maybe the relationships Arsenal and Chelsea have with UEFA. Think about the relationships they have with the sponsors. You know, particularly Gazprom, someone like Marina Granovskaya, you know, and Chelsea's owner, of course, absent at the moment, but still a highly influential man, particularly in that particular industry. That particular industry. That wasn't my best moment. That wasn't my most articulate.
I think that's fine.
Anyway,
talking about oil and gas.
The point remains is that sort of this is a point to say this can never happen again. Mm-hmm. This is one of the highlights of a player's career. Mkhitaryan has played in the Europa League final before for Manchester United, of course, but to deny a player that kind of opportunity, that moment in his career, because of a situation which has nothing to do with football is ridiculous.
And nothing to do with him.
Of course, nothing to do with him. No, absolutely not. It's like, it's sort of, you know, it's a scandal. It is sport, forget football. Sport is supposed to be the relief from stuff like this. It is supposed to be a healing force. It's supposed to be something which transcends stuff like wars and conflicts. And that goes all the way back to the First World War and those kind of, those you know, the stories about, you know, wartime football and Christmas Day and, you know, getting out the trenches, that kind of stuff. And this is sort of like, I can't get my head around it. It's such a ridiculous issue that I almost have no response to it.
Well, look, there's a big conversation to have that perhaps we can have on another podcast about the idea of boycotts. Obviously, Qatar is coming up. It was a topic of conversation in my household because the Eurovision was in Tel Aviv the other day. And so there were some people who were talking about the idea of a boycott as a result of Israel's occupation of Palestine. And I think there's a genuine debate to be had as to the pros and cons of that. I think I come down slightly nowadays. I think I come down more on the side of go ahead with it and try and make the best of it, as opposed to the idea of a boycott. But maybe we can have a whole conversation about that in a future podcast.
Yeah, this is the thing. I mean, I think I'm in the dialogue camp. I think it's a kind of use your influence from the inside of the competition to ensure that that you create this negative precedent whereby it doesn't happen again.
Let football crush kafala, even if that isn't actually happening.
Okay, but
not really happening, but
the same
steps
principle.
towards.
Right, there you go. And so a boycott, the trouble with a boycott here is that, firstly, UEFA have already shown in this sort of news cycle their ability to spin things with their response to Arsenal's letter, which is something straight out of the thick of it, basically.
Well, it's hardly Malcolm Tucker, but it's
not nearly as bright as Malcolm Tucker, but it's a very obvious attempt to take a certain position, which in this instance doesn't belong to them, which they do not have ownership of. And the same thing would happen again. I don't know how that would play out, how a boycott would work really, and what would happen as a result of that. I don't know. But I think I would like to see, at the very least, Arsenal and Chelsea joining together and using their considerable resources and influence to attack this as a problem.
Okay, right. So let's talk for 5 minutes or so now about the football itself. Imagine that. A football podcast talking about football. It doesn't bear thinking
Feels
of.
very quaint.
Well, I have nothing to say either, so I'm relying on you. Obviously, Tottenham are going to win 7-0. Is that correct, Seb? How are you feeling about that?
I'm still in the phase of...
I should say, stop listening now if you're listening after the games. This will be irrelevant to you.
Yeah, unless you want to laugh at what I say.
Yes, that's true.
There seems to be a culture of people that enjoy that. So
well,
maybe listen on. I'm still in the phase of, God, I can't believe we were there. I mean,
when do you think you'll transition to the phase of, I can't believe we've got here and then didn't win? If that happens. I think when you don't win.
Yeah, I think it will kick in big time when I see Tottenham players walking past the European Cup when they come out of the game. That will, because the game against Ajax was such a high. It's such a... I haven't felt anything like that for a really long time, and I never thought I would within a football context. So I don't know. I haven't really got round to thinking about the mechanics of the actual 90 minutes of football or more yet.
How did Tottenham fare against Liverpool domestically this season?
Well, they lost both games, but interestingly, I mean, Liverpool should deservedly be considered heavy favourites for the game. They are the better side.
Yeah.
But Liverpool have issues with Spurs for some reason. They
everyone has issues with Spurs.
Well, they don't. I mean, Liverpool particularly. It's interesting. So,
is it as bad as Man United and Everton about 5 years ago?
Not quite, because Liverpool have tended to come out on the wrong side, on the right side of things. But in the games this season, Liverpool were excellent at Wembley, won 2-1, although were pretty fortunate not to concede a penalty in stoppage time. At Anfield, they were very jittery. There is something about that Tottenham team that they don't like playing. I expect Liverpool to win, but I expect it to be pretty awkward. In truth, I hope so. I mean, it's
cagey or lots of goals.
It depends, because at the time of recording, there are still a few question marks about Tottenham's side. I fully expect Harry Kane to start, because if he's anything close to being fit, he will be picked. There's no doubt about that.
Is that the right move, though, given how well Spurs performed in the competition without him?
An unavoidable one. Harry Kane is Kane. There are two sides to this. Kane the footballer, Kane the goal threat, of course. But Kane has an enormous psychological effect on his teammates. Yeah. So they react differently when he's there around them. So for that alone, he'll be on the pitch. I have no doubt about that. So no, I don't expect cagey. I think it'll be an attractive game of football. I think I very interesting. I honestly don't know. That's not great for a podcast, isn't it? Just to hold your hands up. But
it's just the addendum.
It's such a strange concept. If you wrap this game in a Premier League bow, I can talk you through it. I can talk about sort of what's likely to happen in certain areas of the pitch. But a European Cup final between these two teams is a complete unknown.
Do you think you will be very emotional?
Yeah, I expect so. I expect so. It's a very strange situation, because if Tottenham were to win the European Cup, what then? Because where do you go from there?
Back into the group stages next year.
Well, yeah, but where do you go from emotionally, aspirationally?
Yeah.
You've climbed to I would argue that winning the European Cup supersedes winning the Premier League. If I had to choose between the two of them, I'd choose the European Cup.
I think most people would.
Yeah. So where do you go from? Where do you hope from that point? If your supporter's life is based on hoping for things which will never happen, and then one of those things does actually happen, and then you also exist in a domestic league which is dominated by a an oil state, it's hard.
Well, I suppose there's something in the idea of enjoying the moment, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
and not sort of viewing football as this kind of never-ending long-term project. If Tottenham win next weekend, you'll remember that
I might
forever.
be done with football by then.
Well,
I might retire. I might change jobs. I might never record another podcast.
Well, and fingers crossed that Liverpool wins in that case. Chelsea Arsenal.
Yeah,
that's much harder to predict, isn't it?
It is a little bit because
just to say, I don't want to leave Tottenham fans feeling upset. I feel like permission to do that because of your presence here, Seb.
Absolutely,
and you acknowledge the fact that Liverpool are the heavy favourite. With Arsenal and Chelsea, that there is no real favourite, I would imagine.
I don't think so. I expect Chelsea will be priced as a favourite because they are taking the best player of the two teams into the game. Eden Hazard will be the best player on the pitch.
But there is more in it for Arsenal, right?
I think so.
In terms of an achievement, Chelsea are already in the Champions League. Arsenal aren't.
So this is the sort of the issue here for Arsenal is that at the moment with them outside the Champions League, their summer transfer budget is projected to be around the kind of the 40-45 million pound mark, which in modern football is just you don't buy a very good centre half for that anymore. So it is really a less pressurized game for Chelsea. I think if they win, terrific. If they don't, they'll shrug it off. I'd have thought because they are safe inside the Champions League next season.
Well, also there seems to be no kind of consistent structure or leadership there that wouldn't even need to shrug it off. It would be like it didn't matter that it didn't happen. Obviously, not to the fans. Fans would be clearly would want them to win. But the point I'm making is, as you alluded to already, an absent owner and a very sort of shaky ground in terms of management. I'm reading reports this morning that I don't know how realistic this is, but there's some discussion of Frank Lampard replacing Maurizio Sarri, which may have already happened if that is going to by the time the podcast comes out. We're recording this a week in advance of release.
Yeah, I can't imagine it happening before the final because, well, first of all, Derby have got a playoff final to be playing on Monday night.
Yeah, forget about that. The championship doesn't exist. It doesn't exist, does it?
But I think it's interesting because it's very bizarre for Chelsea to be even in this position because every time I've seen them this season, they've been chaotic and have had to rely on Eden Hazard doing something to gloss over those many imperfections.
He may very well leave in the summer.
He almost certainly will. Yeah, he will. We know he wants to. Whether Real Madrid can come up with a fee which satisfies Marina Granovskaya, we don't know. But it will probably be his last game. Arsenal in a slightly different way are just as flawed. I mean, Hector Bellerin's long-term injury caused huge problems in their defence and their ability to thrust forward from the right side of the pitch. But also, I don't think there is a centre-back combination that Unai Emery can field, which he would really trust. Ditto the midfield combination. Granit Xhaka, still not really what he needs to be at this level. Torreira, not. He was celebrated very early on in his Arsenal career as the kind of the answer to this long-term holding midfield problem. Hasn't really proved that way. So two very flawed teams with some very good attacking players at the top of the pitch, and that's really about it. I think that if I had to put money on it, I think I'd go for Chelsea. I think they are the slightly stronger team, not in terms of structure, because I think Arsenal are being managed better, but it's in terms of a group of players' ability to perform in a one-off game. I think I trust Chelsea more.
Well, this episode goes out the day before the final, I believe. So anyone listening to it on release day won't have long to wait to find out the answer to those questions. We're going to wrap things up there, Seb. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joe,
for attending. Really appreciate that. And one more shout, of course, for the Irish Examiner. Do visit the National Carpet Museum if you are in Baku, and of course the world's biggest KFC. Again, not sponsored by the Irish Examiner. But I wish we were. We've given them some airtime today, haven't we? Well done to the writers of that. Thank you very much for listening. We will be back next week with something as yet undecided. So look out for that. And we'll be back with you soon.